Welcome to DisNewsYouKnowUK podcast. My name's Martin. I'm letting this time capsules talk about disputed news in the UK, to explore the stories and give another opinion. With other news sites out there, if disputed news, disabled people, news affects our lives, instead of reported. And generally, as many of us already know, you're 100% in the media. So then this podcast is an effort to address the balance. And the first story comes from disputed news surveys, and the headline is Government assesses why inaccessible housing after new towns report ignores disabled people. The government has been accused of losing to inaccessible housing after refusing to explain why a report by its task force on different cities and new towns across England does not include a single mention of disabled people. The independent report commissioned by the government recommends 12 potential locations for new towns across England with at least 10,000 new homes in each location. But the 135-page report contains only two brief references to the need for accessibility, either with the new homes themselves or built environment surrounding them, and there's no mention of working as disabled people. One reference to the report says new towns should include homes for older people, as well as specialist housing built to accessible and adaptable standards. The other says the mix of homes in new towns should include homes for market sale, private rent, affordable housing, specialist accommodation for students, families and older people, all within a single coherent master plan. Disabled preference organisations have been campaigning for actions of an accessible housing crisis, were critical of the latest failure by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Mikey Erdhart, policy lead for Disability Rights UK, said it is unacceptable in 2025 a plan to deliver thousands of new homes to tackle the housing crisis or do nothing to improve the lives of disabled people. Relegated the needs of millions to classification specialists shows just how entrenched ableist views are within the department. What is specialist about creating places that millions can actually call home instead of less than 10% that disabled people could commonly even visit? Yet again, we see a government department has lost its way and trying to triangulate policy in favour of big developers and landlords with disabled people as ever missing out. Talk about missed opportunity. They're not even chosen to commit to a minimum number of accessible or wheelchair accessible homes, let alone ensuring DPOs are included in the planning process. And our newest dams can't be accessible. Which ones will be? Last week, Housing Secretary Stephen Reid announced that the government would build 12 of the new towns across England, being his party failed to make any pledge that accessibility would be central to the design. More than 15 months after the general election, sad people are still waiting for the new government to say they will introduce stricter minimum accessibility standards for new homes built in England 3 years after a pledge by the last Conservative government, which was never fulfilled, to take action to address this critical shortage of accessible housing. Laura is seen as a senior policy at stake engagement manager for Inclusion London, so if I butcher the name, said the task force talks about accessible, especially housing, but accessible and adaptable standards must apply to all housing. So we know core for communities. Housing with the baseline and level of accessibility benefits all allows us to stay in our homes longer as our needs change and we age. 3 years ago, the Conservative government committee to raise minimum accessibility standards for new build housing to an M or to accessible and adaptable standard. They didn't follow through. It's time for Labour to commit to it. M4 to accessibility for new builds and for 10% of new housing to be M4 for wheelchair accessible folks in social housing. This is due to ensure that there's a new way of housing and new time to lock us out of safe housing for another generation. Okay. Well, really, it's just, again, so it seems to be signed on an episode-by-episode basis. Disappointing, but not surprising. I'm sure we went into this, and there was an article 3 episodes ago where it was a similar situation about lack of planning, local planning, about accessible housing, and also I think it was infrastructure around railway stations, I think that article was, but it was a similar theme. Again, the commitment to accessible standards that hasn't been met. Consultation that doesn't appear to involve disabled people in any way, even though we're the biggest, arguably losers of the lack of housing stock, and that includes older people, Mark. There's always this fencing off of older people from disabled people, but effectively, a lot of older people, not all, but a lot of older people, develop health issues and mobility issues as they get older, melts through, and effectively, their needs, physical needs, of, effectively they become disabled people because of the mobility issues and other health issues that it's about. So, in terms of the accessibility needs, I don't know why they're differentiated in this way. Well, I do know why. I mean, I think I've discussed this before, and I'll give my opinion on this in the constant differentiation between older people and disabled people as two distinct groups. I think there's an ableism in that. But, as many DPLs have argued and continue to argue, but we've been arguing this for years. I mean, I used to work for a DPO, and we'd go to our local council meetings as reps on partnership boards, and we talked to housing providers, and this was something we were talking about 20 odd years ago, and we were warning about the same crisis that we were in now. Many DPOs were warning value as far back as then, and we weren't listening to him. He's still not being listened to now, and it just makes common sense. If you make housing accessible, and not all, but a significant number of it, you solve, especially in social housing, you solve a lot of problems moving forward, because money that is spent on disabled facilities grants, etc., and so forth. I know probably the overall cost was reduced because of cuts over the years, but it used to be, you were talking single grant would have been between 20 and 30 grand. And yeah, I get that, for private property isn't an option, but in terms of for social housing, then there should be kind of an accessibility scale standard in there, because I think that potentially reduces certain issues later down the line. In terms of accessibility for many people, especially people who essentially for their own, either choose to stay in social housing or cannot afford to migrate to private property, which is, let's face it, as things stand economically, there's an awful lot of people. And I think there's a certain standard should really, to me, it seems like a no-brainer for at least a proportion of all new builds to meet those standards. But again, property developers, government are listening. I think you get it, well, I don't get it, but what I mean is this cost considerations. I mean, you if you look at new builds around a lot of the time, and it just seems like they're getting smaller and smaller, the space for individuals in terms of their individual properties. They're just, the floor space is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So I think they're trying to cram as many people into smaller spaces as possible, which, isn't healthy and isn't good. But they'll argue that obviously there's not only just a lack of accessible housing, there's a lack of land, because a lot of the places, we talk about greenbelt, and also there's a lot of planning disputes when developers do try and buy land and redevelop it. But, there's to be a way around that, really, because it's just not good enough. Next story comes from RT, which is the Ireland Irish newspaper. New Disability Rights Equality Organisation launches. Disability Rights Equality Organisation, which will be upfront and uncompromising in calling out matters impacting disabled people, has been launched. God for one, it's been spearheaded by disability activists Dr. Margaret Kennedy and Advocate Michael O'Dowd. The campaign highlighting what the group described as the state's failure to disabled people cited neglect, underfunding and a lack of meaningful reform will be rolled out nationally in the coming weeks. The project was supported by the Department of Social Welfare under its programme of the United Nations International Day of Education and Eradication of Poverty, which is on Friday. Speaking of the event, Dr. Margaret Kennedy said that just for several people, which describes Dickensian and not changed in 30 years due to ableism. Ultimately, she said poverty was being given to unstable people, and she questioned why society was designed that way. When asked for services or if a being pushed, something remessed it's going to cost money, and they were trying to hire. She told both gathered. Dr. Kennedy outlined services she required, including new therapy, which described last week as hell after a personal assistant moved to Spain, which has left her without a PA for 3 days a week. Dr. Kennedy said she refused to be mistreated and would not going to a nursing home. Autism multi-dimensional, so we're not a burden, she said. Alice O'Neill also spoke at the launch and outlined the special experience for disabled people, which she said meant they were cut off from participation in society. Access is adapted for, she said, disabled people, disabled women, doubly marginalised. Some there was involved in a study that was published last year, which lends unstable experience of intimate partner abuse in Ireland, carried out in partnership with the Women's Aid and the Level Gender-Based Violence Task Force. She said disabled women were doubly marginalised, abused as a burden. Miss O'Neill and Dr. Kennedy highlighted sexual abuse for older women. Sorry to the trigger woman who warned that. Glad to note in the case of Emily and she's a victim of abuse with the exact words. I live in absolute terror of having to go into a nursing home. We all lived in a constant fear, and it's sucking the joy out of my life. Dr. Kennedy said, however, conversely, it's keeping me going, as my fear of he's keeping me energized and giving me impetus to keep going. Jackie Hanley has a 26-year-old son who's autistic. She explained the battle for help which she pursued to his childhood. He was diagnosed 2 months prior to his 18th birthday, by which stage she said she was informed that it was too late. Because she sent to adult services. She said there were no. She says my father never had an SNA because he was overlooked. Expectations on parents to take on everything. Bizarrely points out there was an expectation on parents to take on everything. She spoke to a mother of 2 autistic children at the weekend who was offered an online course for parents to train in occupational therapy and speech language therapy. They expected to be occupational therapists, care and parent together, she said, Miss Henry. Carers, personal assistants, everyone else is robbing of this government, she added. Miss Hanley said she had grief for her son and his life potential. Without the correct interventions, he did not receive the required skills to draw from an adult. As an adult, she explained. Michael Dowd said inclusion must be in access to real jobs, education and independence. Decades report of report from these courses. The Farley Commission has exposed neglect and systematic failure, he said. Yet little changes, kind every policy delay. He said life on hold. He said poverty of exclusion shows what happens when disability is treated as charity rather than as citizenship and rights. Mr. Dowd was particularly critical of the government's employment strategy to say people with disabilities, saying it lacks both ambition and accountability, especially within the public sector, where the state should be leading by example. There's a strategy, but it is limited, he said. Public sector employment targets remain low and unenforced until government itself comes a model of inclusion that private employers will not feel compelled to add. This is not inclusion, it is managed exclusion, he said. Absence of safe colonization. He also highlighted the absence of safe colonization and the lack of statutory right to personal assistance and the fragmented nature of disability services where duplication and bureaucracy persist while individuals go without support. Carpone is calling for a statutory right to personal assistance for independent living, an introduction of adult safeguarding legislation, a revised, ambitious employment strategy with clear public sector targets, transparency and accountability in disability funding, and genuine participation of disabled people in decision-making. Dr. Margaret Kennedy described as a disgrace not having all opportunities of others because of an impairment. On a supposedly enlightened and economically well-off country, where poverty is one of many issues is that I could find those people to support me, to live my life as I wish, she said. The issue of carers. Personal distance was raised widely at the launch. It was noted that there were not enough carers due to inadequate pay. In September, the government launched a new disability strategy for the next 5 years. The National Human Rights Strategy for Disabled People aims to ensure disabled people can live with choice, dignity, autonomy and inclusion on an equal basis with others. The maximum rate of carers allowance and carers benefits are due to increase by £10 per week in January. I must admit, I was very enlightening. I was have to admit them. I was very ignorant of the state of affairs in relation to disability rights in Ireland. I wasn't aware of them at all, and to be honest, I am a bit shocked though, generally usually shocked. So I often say, being cynical as I am, but I am quite shocked at the ability to be even far behind where the rest of the UK is on both sides of things, if there's no even strategy on safeguarding, and they haven't quite got to independent. They do the same with independent living strategy that we have in the rest of the UK. We have the legislation, but the progress seems to have lagged way behind. Also, you've got progressive legislation, but progress seems to be 30 years beyond the actual legislation in the UK. May seem on the face of it, and again, I'm saying a microphone because I'm not aware of positive factors in the island. They seem to be far behind where we are, which is, quite shocking. A brief Google review seems that they have a health service executive, and you contact them, you create an assessment of need, and the Disability Act of 2005 allows those people to request a full assessment of their health and educational needs. HSE conducts the assessment, and its outcome determines the service support you provide. Comments up-to-date guidance on applicating social care contact the Citizens Information Service. So I guess that's their version of the Citizens Advice Service. I'm not sure whether that's a public service in terms of provided by the state, or whether it's public provider. I have the Islamic National Advocacy Service, very confidential service for disabled adults, Inclusion Ireland campaigns for people with intellectual disability and provides information advice. So they've obviously got the organisations, and St. Gavin and Umbrella Group, Disability Federation of Ireland, Access Business Services. HSE offers a range of services for disabled people, which can include supported accommodation, independent living services, home help, bespoke care, and diagnosis and personal assistance. Key rights for disabled people, protection from discrimination, disabled people in Ireland have the right not to be discriminated against, or accessing a wide range of goods and services for 757 to the DDA, rights and assessment of need when the Disability Act. Right to independent living based on the unique range of human rights, supported decision-making act, use to limited capacity act, and advocacy support. So at least they've rights free, independent, and competition advocacy. That's good. Whether it's the same as what happened here in terms of you at the UK, where it was prior to that, there was no legal right for local authority to provide advocacy, but obviously now there is. Problem is they're funding advocacy, so the strength of which, whereas before independent advocacy, the strength of which was in many cases, not all, but in many cases was very strong because and independent. I'm not saying that it's not good advocacy now there is, but obviously if you're the provider is a local authority that you're trying to get in this, there's a lot of independence there, and yeah, there's question marks as to, which system's better. I think it's obviously the right, legislative right. Traffic is always good, but you need strong local service that will challenge all local authority providers. One thing I did find interesting is there's a Regulated Professional Health and Social Care Amendment Act of 2023, and it said this act makes social care workers a regulated profession with legislation managed by the Health and Social Care Professionals Council, which is very kind of surprising. You're talking 2 years ago, so does that mean that social care work was unregulated till that point? It's very interesting. Obviously, being good in the head of their history, but yeah, it's interesting. If that's the case, then there are probably millions. A lot of credence to the article and the concerns that were in the article, because it seems as if obese initiatives and rights are fairly new. Things such as regulation of all care workers was essentially a Wild Wild West up until 2 years ago, and that kind of shows how much of a lottery maybe the social care system is for disabled people in Ireland. Mind you, even in the UK, yes, we've got registers a body for support workers and social care workers. However, if you're a personal assistant, independent, direct payments or personal budgets, as it is for people at home, they are still unregulated. There's no body for them. So, there's still elements of that in our system. Then, like I say, I'm not, I don't know, I'm not, no knowledge of the Irish system. But, and also it's, it's butchers legislatively looks as though on the face of it we're further ahead than Ireland. Yeah, are we? Really? Again, skips an episode after episode, this story after story of, legislators up there, but he's there, but it's not being enforced. And as it has been times 4 for us, we're going back in time 30 years rather than forward. So, it's Judge Highland just shows the picture that, disabled people, no matter where you are, either in the UK, Ireland, or internationally, it's a struggle, and, we want just probably more reason for more unity across the globe, disabled people to work together to where we can, those who can, to build stronger links among bonds. And like I've said before, in my personal opinion, I think we need disability think tanks. I think we need think tanks to write disability legislation again, to try and campaign and have a picture of what's possible, realistic, and moving forward. And you need to get around, my opinion, to, think tanks of people actually, versed in policy and lobbying and, those who've knowledge of Whitehall, etc. and so forth, to which there will be, they are disabled people. Obviously, we've got people in the laws and things, so it's, I think that's what's needed for. Not just here, but internationally. And obviously, this article is an example of that, so I hope that, they get more progress in Ireland. I mean, obviously, it's not like, they're not miles behind the UK, but they are. And they're still behind us, but we just hope, things will move forward, so regardless of where they are in the world. I'm actually going to wrap it up for this episode. I know it's usually do about 3 to 4 stories, but yeah, I think that's it for this episode. So thanks for listening. Thank you, and bye.